Okay, it is 5 o'clock on March 12th, 2019. I am calling this meeting to order, having a quorum. We are moving to item number 2, executive session. We will be convening into executive session for item 2A. City Council shall convene into closed executive session pursuant to Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code to confer with the City Attorney regarding the status of building Bastrop. It is 5 o'clock and we are in executive session. Good evening. It is 6:30 and we are out of executive session and ready to start our regular session. So, as authorized by Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code, this meeting may be convened into closed executive session for the purposes of seeking confidential legal advice from the City Attorney on any item on the agenda at any time during the meeting. The City of Bastrop reserves the right to reconvene, recess, or realign the regular session or called executive session or order of business at any time prior to adjournment. I will let everyone know that my intention is when we finish item 7C, which is the city manager's report, we will be jumping to the items for individual consideration, which can be found on page 3. And we'll go through those A through D, but we have some folks that may like to have some of their evening back. So we're going to jump to the items for individual consideration, and then we will come back and go to item 8A, just for everyone to be aware of that. So tonight, we were supposed to have Reagan Ferrum and Taylor King from Student Council, and are y'all there? Are you Reagan? Okay, well, what you have to do is come to the microphone and tell us your name and tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Ingram.
They can't hear you. You got to get...
Hi, I'm Caitlin Ingram. I'm here with Bastrop High School Student Council. I play volleyball and I'm a sophomore.
Fantastic. Have you thought about going to college?
Yes, ma'am. I really would like to go to UT.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. We are so proud to have you here to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone will please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now for the Texas Pledge. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Let's give Caitlin a round of applause.
Thank you.
And if you will please remain standing, Cliff Sparks, who is one of our police chaplains, will be leading us in the invocation tonight.
Let us pray. Lord, thank you. We're just grateful. We can't list all the things that you bless us with, but we're thankful for all of them. Just ask that you would bless us with the presence of your Holy Spirit and give us your wisdom to do all things decently and in order and properly in a spirit of goodwill and with loving kindness. And I ask that everyone that serves you here, that's answered the call to serve each of the citizens of this city, that you'd bless them in their souls, that their souls would be like well-watered gardens. And we thank you for all these things and for peace and prosperity in this city, of which there's no equal, and we thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Chaplain Sparks. The chaplains serve such a wonderful purpose in the community, and we are very thankful for each and every one of them. I'm moving on to page 2 of the agenda, and we're at presentations, the mayor's report. I had just a couple of quick things. We did finish the ITT challenge on March 3rd, and I'll be giving a summary of where we ended up and how many points we had and all of that. Am I messing with you, Colin? Okay. I also wanted to let you guys know, we got some news from TxDOT this week. The 71 frontage bridges that are going to go over the Colorado River, that's the universal sign for frontage bridges. They were going to bid in March and be let in May, and that has been delayed, and they will be bid in May and let in July. So we had thought that we might have some of that construction going on early this summer, but it'll be a little bit later. And that's one of those things that we don't have control over, but we're glad to pass on the information so folks are aware of that. And then also, several folks in the community are aware of this. I would just like everyone to keep Tanya Cantrell and her family in your thoughts and prayers today. It's very much appreciated. So if you go to the next slide, you will see that I was a part of the Pedal for a Purpose for the YMCA, and that's Johnny Bond rode before I did, so he was handing off the bike to me, and then that is Andy Sexton, who's the BISD athletic director, and when I got off the bike, Andy got on. The bottom left-hand corner, one of my favorite, I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but I'm sorry, the Empty Bowl project is just, when other people are cooking and you don't have to clean up and you get to taste such wonderful food. It's a great way to spend a Saturday morning, and there's Tresha Silva, they had the folks that were judging, they had just a great time, and I really appreciate that. The opportunity to be there for Bastrop County Emergency Food Pantry just does some wonderful things for our community. And then the TML Elected Officials Conference, that is Councilmember Ennis, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson, and myself. We were each awarded our certified municipal official at that conference, and we're all there smiling with our new pins. It means that we did 72 hours of training so that we can be the best city council members that we can be, and we enjoyed spending some time together, and it's always beneficial to talk with folks that are also in the same boat.
And Mayor, before you leave, I think that merits a round of applause. I think it's important to acknowledge that 70 hours, isn't that what you said?
72 hours.
72 hours, that's a lot of on top of what you signed up to do. And I know that y'all do a lot of important networking based on the programs that you bring back, the relationships that you build that only make this community stronger, and I appreciate each and every one of you, and want to acknowledge that this is an annual certification. This is your second time you've been certified. I think I'm not sure if the others have, but this is an annual deal, and it's a big deal, and I don't want it to go unnoted as you were graciously going to slide right on by.
I appreciate that. You obtain the hours between January 1st and December 31st, and that's how you're certified for the following year. So we were really proud of three of us being able to get that done. I think it's especially nice that the city manager's acknowledging it, because I think she cringes when we all go to the TML conference, because we start texting back, do we do this and can we do that? And we get some good questions, and I think the city attorney and the city manager both are happy that we're getting educated and sometimes cringe a little bit with some of the new questions that we ask. Down below that, I was asked to attend the TTIA, which is the Texas Travel Industry Unity Dinner, and that is Representative Cyrier, and the person on the right is Mary Connie, and I believe it's Kinsir is how you say her name. She is the mayor of Gonzales, and Representative Cyrier said there's not that many female mayors, especially whose both first name is Connie. So that was Representative Cyrier with two Mayor Connies. And she was the first female mayor in Gonzales in 2016, so it was nice to meet her. Then over to the right, the next day, I was at the BEDC Legislative Conference, and BEDC sponsored one of the snack events, and that's the Executive Director, Mike Camerlander, and I standing by the sign that said that Bastrop had provided the snacks at one of the breaks during one of the days of the conference. And then at the top, I was asked to participate in, and it was great to be a part of Bastrop High School's Senior Serve for their raising funds for their project graduation of 2019. So, going on to the next page, I have to confess, I did do the elected officials conference. I did not make it to the Zumbathon for body toners, but I did make it to the 4-H livestock sale, and they were going on at the same time, so I just couldn't be in two places at once. I went to the Texas Free Victory or Death at the Bastrop Opera House. I know Mayor Pro Tem Nelson was there. It was just an outstanding show and really enjoyed doing that. Had a board meeting, a chamber luncheon. Last week we had the mayor's prayer breakfast. Councilmember Rogers, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson, and myself went to Rockdale for the Region 10 TML meeting, and we heard Representative Terry Wilson speak. He's from District 20, and we enjoyed that. And then I participated in the 5K Friday night and the 10K Saturday morning, and that allowed me to win the medal for the Lost Pines Challenge, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be doing that again. I'm still a little bit sore. And that afternoon, I was then a part of the Go Texan Chili and Bean Cook-Off, and that organization raises funds to give scholarship money to Bastrop County High School graduates, and that was a very interesting afternoon. They had a great time, and then it's the 12th, and here we are today. Tomorrow we have a community support quarterly meeting. There's a ribbon cutting at the Pitts Sports Grill, which is a new restaurant on Main Street. The Hunters Crossing meeting has been canceled that was scheduled for the 14th. And I have a BEDC meeting on Monday, and then I am still being a guest speaker for the Circa class, but I'm going to be doing it also on Monday the 25th, and on Friday the 22nd I'll be at a legislative conference, and then it'll be time to be back at council. So that is my mayor's report. Do you have anything to report?
I also was at Senior Serve, and it was great, and wanted to let you know I'm number 2 internationally in the CrossFit Challenge that's going on right now for my division.
Yay, congratulations.
Yeah.
Councilmember Ennis?
Not tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
I followed you to a couple of places, and that's about it.
We have spent some time together lately. Councilmember Rogers? Councilmember Peterson?
Nothing at this time, Mayor. Thank you.
It's great to see you, Mr. Peterson.
It's great to be seen.
City Manager? All right. We're jumping over to page 3. Colin, you with me? We're going to 12A. I'll read it while you get there. Council, you have 2 exemptions tonight in front of you. The documents were left on the dais. I am on 12A. Consider action and approve resolution number R 2019-27 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, making determinations regarding certain project-specific exceptions and/or exemptions as provided by Emergency Ordinance 2018-1 and Emergency Ordinance 2018-2, Section 7. Ms. Bills.
Good evening. So we have 2 tonight. The first is a waiver, and the second is essentially alternative design standards on a site plan. So the first site is a 3.55 acre tract north of town out in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, and they're requesting, they will be applying to do a 3-lot subdivision in the ETJ. They're anticipating that each lot will have around 7,000 square feet of impervious cover, which would cover house, driveway, any accessory buildings, and that would increase the runoff for all 3 lots to a total of 2.47 CFS. So it's under 1 CFS per lot. This is located between BJ Mays Road and State Highway 95, and then the lot is fairly flat. The topo, it drains a little bit towards BJ Mays Road, and then eventually the water drains to the south. Any questions?
So it's going to a bar ditch on BJ Mays? Is that the bottom line?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve. Jones?
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Peterson. Is there any further questions or discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes. Motion passes unanimously, so the project on BJ Mays Road is approved. Ms. Bills?
The second is at 202 West State Highway 71. This is on the south side of 71. It's the it's the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. It's an existing church. They have a site plan on file with us that they did several years ago when they expanded their parking lot. They had intended to expand the actual church footprint, and some additional parking was in that site plan. They've changed what they're doing, and they want to put a new building on the back side of the building instead of the church addition, so they need to do a site plan amendment. In doing that, they have to revisit their drainage study to make sure that that the existing pond can still hold the runoff that'll be created by this building. The engineer looked at the existing drainage with the new calculations using Atlas 14, so the updated numbers, and the pond the existing pond will hold all of that and release the post-development flows at lower rates than the pre-development flows. So they'll be releasing the water at a slower rate than what previously run off the site.
So they've shared that drainage analysis with you now,
But they'll still have to do
submit
that
it,
with the
the
site
final
plan.
plans with the site plan.
Yeah, and they plan to do, I think, a little bit of repair work on the drainage pond while they're there. So,
Is it your next
I
slide?
didn't slip over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the addition is to the back side of the building along Hasler Street, and the existing pond is on the pointer is not working. The blue square, that's the existing pond that's there today, and it's a fairly large pond for the site. It was intended to hold the full site development when they expanded the church and the parking lot, which they're now not planning to do.
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Jones.
Second, and thank you, Ms. Bills, for including the Atlas information.
I have a motion from Councilmember Jones and a second from Councilmember Ennis. Is there any further discussion? Great job on the packet, Jennifer. Really appreciate it. Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Yes.
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 The motion passes unanimously. The Good Shepherd Lutheran Church Modular Classroom Addition is approved. All right. We're moving on to item B. Consider action to approve resolution number R 2019-22 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, approving a task order for additional design, bidding, and construction phase services for the Main Street Field Engineering Project to MWM Design Group in the amount of $78,010.75 as attached in Exhibit A, authorizing the city manager to execute all necessary documents, providing for a repealing clause, and establishing an effective date. Mr. Jobe.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This project's been ongoing for quite a while. The BDC issued about $800,000 in 2013 originally for a piece of Main Street that was going to be done between Chestnut to Pine. They expanded that. We issued a scope of work in 2016 for work from, let me get my street straight here, from Farm Street to Spring Street.
Wells Fargo to Pine Street. No,
That's what
from
we're asking for tonight. I'm giving some history of how we got here.
Okay.
So we started from Farm to Spring, sidewalks only, and from Spring all the way to Pine would be sidewalks and street repair, sorry.
And that's in the original scope.
That is in the original scope, let me be clear. So what we're asking for tonight,
Original scope, Spring to Pine was sidewalk and street repair, right?
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And tonight, we're bringing before you is an additional 3 blocks that you can see will be from Pine Street to Water Street, and that will also just be sidewalks and minor street repair.
Whoa. Because I read it only sidewalks.
We'll do some additional repair as we go, not necessarily in this sidewalk scope, I'm sorry, let me be clear. This work is for the sidewalk.
This work
is for
is
the
for-
trail to continue the loop that will extend at Water. Sorry, from Water to 71, which is part of the downtown loop. Basically, we have a gap. What we're bringing you here tonight is to fill the gap between Pine Street and Water Street that will happen with the other projects that are funded.
But in this section, MWM is going to design the landscape and continue to this section,
Correct.
and is going to have streetlights that will be
Correct.
density.
Yes.
Because in the summer, we added some of the CO funding to extend this project so that it would go from Water Street all the way to
That is correct.
Spring Street.
That is correct.
And this project scope now gives MWM Design the entire project from Water Street to Farm Street.
I was going to say, aren't we still picking up the sidewalks
Yes.
from Spring to Farm?
What I meant in the entire project, some areas will be street and sidewalk repair, and some areas will just be sidewalk.
And
I'm
this
sorry.
hopefully will be the last time we'll have to have a confusing conversation about this
Amen.
project.
That is correct.
So it will go from Water Street to Farm Street, and it will be Main Street, and we're planning for the next 100 years of how Main Street performs.
That is correct. And it will basically add an additional scope of work of $78,010.75 for the total project engineering cost, which is not what we're approving, just the $78,000 for $151,381.50.
Okay, and it also said that we're redoing the field survey for the total length?
Correct.
What happened to the field survey before?
We didn't have a CAD file on the original survey, just PDFs.
Okay.
And I want it to be as accurate as possible. We have some property right-of-way concerns. We want to make sure we're all right.
How much of the $73,370.75 was expended?
Currently, about $4,000. It's not been very much. Out of the original issue that we did, we have, out of the original $800,000, I think we have $754.
No, that's different numbers. Because the original $800,000 that they've only spent $4,000 of was BEDC
That's
dollars for construction. And was the $73,000 awarded that contract by BEDC or by the city?
So it was awarded by the city.
Using
The
their,
BEDC issued the funds for the city. For the
Okay.
$800,000, we have used that money to date to engineering.
Let's be clear, the city sold the debt. BEDC is paying for it.
okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
So it is city-issued debt.
Yes.
And the first portion of this is going to be reimbursed by BEDC. The second piece of this, we have certificate of occupancy already sold and money in the bank. So this project is fully funded.
So
Correct.
BEDC is reimbursing $73,370.75 because they agreed to do that many years ago in a galaxy far, far away.
So this is where it gets confusing, that hopefully we won't have to have the conversation again. The $73,370 contract is for the BEDC portion that they're reimbursing.
Okay?
The $78,010.75 is for the new portion that you funded with COs.
Yep, I got that.
And very little of the $800,000 that BEDC has agreed to pay has been expended.
So the
Correct.
document that was signed by Marvin Townsend in 2016, in December of 2016, there were deliverables that were supposed to happen 5 weeks later. I don't really want to go back all through the history, but it sounds like for whatever reason, it didn't get off of square one.
It was stalled because we were having issues getting the easements.
And when I read the staff report, it looks like there's only 68% of the easements currently.
That is correct.
So are there funds to acquire easements included in the $78,010.75?
No, they're not.
Because that's in the original scope.
Correct. This is for engineering, is what you're approving tonight.
I'm just trying to be clear about where we are. So are we going to get started on this survey with or without the easements in hand?
Yes, I need to identify for sure where the
Where
property
we
lines are
owe
at.
and where.
That's correct.
Because we're not exactly sure what easements we still need.
Well, we're not
No.
exactly what we own that we don't need easements for.
I'm aware of which easements have been signed and are filed and which are not. What I want to do is identify the right-of-way. Because the right-of-way, while
It's not consistent
it's
all
not
the way
straight,
to.
it's not built straight inside the right-of-way.
Yeah. that
So you
doesn't
may have
surprise
as
me.
much as 6 inches in front of a storefront that's owned by a private property owner, you may have as much as 10 feet, because the road is not laid out exactly the same.
And on something as important in this, we need to be right.
I-
And what we're telling you is, we can't guarantee you we're right.
Yes, this will help us
So
better
I'm fine with
identify-
that. And if we're going to have the conversation, we need to know exactly where the right-of-way is, and we need to
Yes.
be clear about what we own and what we don't own. But where I'm
Yes.
going with all of this is I am not comfortable, and I know that our downtown property owners are great people, and I don't expect this to be a problem, but I am not going to be comfortable with someone holding us hostage because we have to pay whatever they want to get that easement in order to finish the project. So I want to know, there's a part of me that wants to say, we're fixing the road and the sidewalk in front of your property. I'm wanting you to sign the easement. I'm not sure why all the taxpayers in town need to pay you money for an easement for us to improve the sidewalk and the road in front of your property. So what I'm trying to understand is there an amount of money set aside for that, or is that something that will come back to council?
That would come back to
That
council.
will come back to council.
Yeah,
So that is a process that will have to be addressed before we move forward with the project. But
Yes.
MWM has to figure out who's on first, who's on second, who's on third, because we
Correct.
can't have that conversation until we get this information.
Correct.
Because you're exactly right. You need to be right when you have that conversation.
And I've found that property owners are a lot easier to work with when you bring them a survey. It shows exactly what we're doing. And this just gives you that first step.
I just wanted to make sure for me specifically, and I am so sorry, council, that I'm asking all the questions and not letting you go first, but I wanted to make sure that authorizing this was not authorizing purchasing of easements to complete the project.
Has nothing to do with it.
Okay,
That's correct.
all right. Sorry, Councilmember Rogers, would you like to ask a question?
Well, what I'd like to know is, because, being not quite a downtown merchant, but I've heard these sidewalks going to be repaired, I think, since my firstborn. So if we approve this and you get your survey, is the city, are we prepared to continue to the next step, or is it going to be, okay, have this survey and we'll talk about it again in 5 more years?
You have all of the money in the bank. So we are prepared to move forward with this project. It will be built in accordance with the codes that are adopted that y'all will be talking about. The question that has to happen is, once we determine what property we own and don't own, then we have to acquire that we don't. That's a separate conversation that has nothing to do with MWM. I can't get from surveying to construction without authorization. And that is incumbent on this council and you establishing policy and going through. I think in the past, it hit a stone wall and the project got shelved. So we are working to make sure our ducks are in a row. So when you have that tough conversation, and it could be a tough conversation, you need to be right. So we're trying to make sure that when we bring that to you and its time has come, that to Trey's point, we have an architectural design. This is what it's going to look like. This is where it is. This is where it's going to go on your property. And this is how much of your property we need. So that the right hand knows what the left hand's doing and vice versa. And as soon as MWM can get this worked out, it will come back before you and we'll be able to have that conversation.
Yes.
Thank you for explaining that. I just didn't want to spend money for it to sit on the shelf somewhere. I wanted to make sure we were spending money to do something once we get our other answers.
We actually gave a presentation, and it's in June of last year. We can bring back some more of that information, and it has lots of options.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ennis?
Thank you, Mayor. I was the former council liaison to the Main Street program, and as you know, Mr. Job, I worked with the Main Street Design Committee on the previous section with it was this same group of engineers, wasn't it?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Would it be appropriate to include the Main Street Design Committee in their work?
I think that well, here's what I would say. It's perfectly fine for y'all to include whoever you want when they get to that point. But we've got to get all of this worked out so we can have that conversation and know that we're having the right one.
I'm just speaking of the architectural, not the down and dirty part of it.
I think a lot of that's going to come from some of the design standards that will be adopted through our codes. The way that I've looked at this project is that this is going to be your catalyst project for a way to take those codes and bring them to life and add the next 100 years with the streetscape and the light standards and those kinds of things that you would see on a street, and use Main Street as the way to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So I noticed that the field survey is completed in 5 weeks and the 90% drawings are completed in 4 weeks. How do you finish the drawings without having all the survey?
So a lot of this is going to be field engineered. So a good majority of it will be the survey work. We'll have some certain standards and specs, and then it will be an overall, there will be adjustments in the field if you need to. You get a better price that way when you take it to bid.
I don't think you answered my question.
Oh, okay, sorry, let me try again.
If the field survey is going to be done in 5 weeks, how do you get to 90% drawings
So
in
we are
4 weeks?
about-
Because
we
both
are-
of those are from the notice to proceed.
Yes, so we had actually gotten to about a 60% on the original stuff.
Oh, because you're counting on the stuff that you've already done.
That's correct.
Okay.
It is going to be
Thank you.
much quicker than it would have been. You're just
Okay.
going to duplicate what's on the next day.
Okay, all right. Mr. Peterson, and anybody else? Okay, Mr. Job, is there anything else you want? So this, again, this amount that we're approving tonight, the conversation is for COs that have been sold that are shown in our budget book, and the amount of the contract would be to MWM Design Group for $78,010.75.
That is correct.
I have one more question, I'm sorry.
Please.
When you fund this, will this finish out the BEDC bond, all that money, or there'll still be money left out of that original bond that BEDC?
So the original bond is for 800,000, and this piece is only 73,000 of that 800,000.
Right, so is there a time limit on spending the rest of that money? I
No,
didn't know if
ma'am.
there was. Okay,
No,
thank you.
ma'am.
But to be clear, the project will probably cost everything that you have in the bank today.
Any other questions? Councilmember Peterson, do you have something to say?
No, Mayor, I just want to move for approval.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Peterson.
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Jones. Is there any further questions or conversations? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Yes.
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 The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Job and City Manager. I'm glad we don't have to have that complicated. I was drawing maps and everything, trying to figure out what we had approved. All right, moving on to 12C. Consider action to approve resolution number R 2019-26 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, to approve a subdivision variance to allow the relocation of an overhead electric line to remain overhead when all utilities are required to go underground within the Pecan Park residential plan development located west of Sterling Drive and north of the Colorado River as shown in Exhibit A within the city limits of Bastrop, Texas, providing for a repealing clause and establishing an effective date. Ms. Bills.
Good evening. So this is a subdivision variance. Within our subdivision code, it requires all new utilities to go underground in a new subdivision. So what the applicant is requesting is that there's an existing Bluebonnet service line that provides redundant service for the area, that they are wishing to relocate that as an overhead line. The line in question, currently there's an existing line, and the pointer doesn't want to work tonight, along the tree line, along the river, there's an existing line that connects into where the green line is shown. And then, they're wishing to relocate it to the red line at the edge of the property. The overhead line would be in a dedicated 30-foot easement along the edge of the property. It wouldn't be running across any individual property owner's properties, and it would also be within the open space along to the south of all the properties. So all this new utilities for the subdivision will be going underground. This is the redundant Bluebonnet service line that was already there that they're wishing to relocate as an overhead line. And the applicant and Bluebonnet are here if you have any questions.
So to be clear, your requirement is that all service lines be underground, and they are that. This is really a redundant power source from Bluebonnet. It's being moved from a prominent place in the subdivision to the edge of the subdivision. So it seems like the spirit and the intent of your ordinance is being met without creating an undue hardship on the developer for the secondary source of power to come into the subdivision. Hence why staff recommends approval.
So this is the western boundary?
Yes, it's Pecan Park, and there will be Sterling Drive is going to. It's under construction right now. If you're out there, it connects to Agnes and then goes south. Back up one more. Agnes Street will connect down where you see that little driveway right now. That's a new road that's being built It'll go down into Pecan Park, so this line will be on the west side of that road.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, is the green line above ground right
It's
now?
above ground. So that's an above ground line today, and there's an existing above ground line that's to the south that's they're not disturbing with this. We'll continue on with the red line and go back up north.
So basically, we're just exchanging above ground to above ground.
Yes.
And getting it out of the middle of a tract of land and putting it on a property line. Councilmember Rogers, another question, did you?
But we require everybody else to go underground, is that correct?
Not a major transmission line like this.
So it's not the same as what we require other people to put it underground? I just want to make sure we're doing everybody fair, the same. Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Both, I think you and Councilmember Jones have been subjected to this on an individual lot basis. All of the individual residential lots are underground in this subdivision, yes,
I was
ma'am.
just making sure we're making sure that
Yes, ma'am.
residential ones will require from one, since it's the big one. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson, you had your line?
I just wanted to ask if that's.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
Councilmember
okay.
Jones?
So who owns the land immediately to the west there? Just talk about that ownership a little bit.
Immediately to the west, it's one property owner. I believe it's the Cantrell tract.
What?
Ms. Cantrell owns that.
And she has no
Cantrell
problem
family.
with that?
It won't be on her land. It'll be on Pecan Park's land in an easement that they're dedicating.
I understand that, but does she know it's being moved there and
We have not been in contact with her on this issue.
Councilmember Rogers?
Approve.
Second.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Rogers. I have a second from Councilmember Ennis. Is there any other questions or comments? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Yes.
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 No.
The motion passes 4-1. Resolution 2019-26 is approved. Now moving to item 12D, consider action to approve resolution number R 2019-28 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, approving a contract to provide services as presiding municipal judge to Blas Coy Jr., attached as Exhibit A, authorize the city manager to execute necessary documentation, providing for a repealing clause, and establishing an effective date. Ms. Waldron.
Good evening. So just a little background on Judge Coy. He was appointed by council on October 24, 2017 as associate judge. And in the light of Judge Hines' resignation, council appointed him presiding judge effective January of 2019. This is, we're just bringing back his contract for approval and establishing compensation. We have put in the contract the scope of work, which is all of the duties that Judge Hines was doing, all the duties that are required by the presiding judge, and looking at how many hours that would take. We have also given him the compensation that's in line with what Judge Hines had and also what was appropriated in the fiscal 2019 budget.
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve
I'll second.
and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Has Judge Coy, is he okay with this? Okay. Any other questions? I just thought it was worth asking if he's going to sign it, you know. Any other questions? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Yes.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Resolution number R 2019-28 is approved, and congratulations to Municipal Judge Coy. All right, Colin, we're going to be jumping back to work sessions. I'm on page 2. I'm at work session briefings on item 8A, continued discussion from the February 26, 2019 City Council meeting regarding the low-impact development, geographically sensitive design standards of the new proposed drainage code revisions. Looks like Ms. Umble's going to the podium. Oh, they left you clickerless.
No, where is the presentation I loaded? Do what? No, I loaded it in the PowerPoint presentation for you. Loaded it in.
While he's doing that, we're going to do item 8D, update and discussion of current legislative session and its impact on local municipalities. I will let the citizens know we've been obviously very closely following both Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 2. The Senate committee hearing was not all that pleasant for everyone, but it did go till 11 o'clock at night, and it has not moved out of the Senate. It's become stalled. They did have a House committee hearing. It was held on February 27th. There were about 13 mayors that testified. And one of the other things that has happened, and Councilmember Rogers and Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and myself had the opportunity to hear from Terry Wilson when we were at the Region 10 meeting, and there is a school finance bill that has been posted where they are trying to address how they will handle the school finance portion of it. It is my personal opinion that something will ultimately pass. I remain hopeful that that number is above 2.5%. I'm pretty sure it's going to be above 2.5 and less than 8, and it will be, they're making sausage right now, and there's a lot of conversations being had. And one of the most recent things that are in House Bill 2 is that it would be applicable to all of the municipalities. In the state of Texas, there's right around 1,200 municipalities. Approximately 150 of those municipalities were impacted by the gate level that they set of the 15 million, but the way that the most recent verbiage has been written, it would apply to all municipalities, and they would have to have a mandatory November election, and the voters would have to approve the exemption. So it's one of those things that once they finally, whatever they finally approve, will have to, it could impact us greatly. It could be not that big of a deal, but the school finance seems to be being addressed, and I would encourage folks to reach out to both their state senator and their state representative and encourage them that your local representatives are people that they get to spend a whole lot more time with than having the state folks deciding blanket rules for all of the municipalities. Okay. We're going to keep going, Council. There are no staff and board reports, which is item number 9. Item number 10 is citizen comment, and I'm going to let the city secretary bring me what she's got. Yeah, you can bring it now. Okay, the first person that I have is Glenn Johnson, from who resides at 1109 Pecan Street. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm going to speak on three items that affect my property. I was pleased at the last council meeting that the unenforceable Van Diver settlement was amended. Your staff was very prompt in getting me copies of it under open records request. I do have concerns about the optionalization of the safety provisions, but I will talk about that at some other time. The second point is the building code. We've been frustrated in trying to get a carport or garage built on our property, and I'm not speaking on that because I understand there was a executive session and other discussions are going to go on about that, so we'll continue to wait for the building codes so that we can finally build a garage on our property. The third topic is one that is one of y'all's least favorite topics, and I know Councilmember Jones spoke maybe several weeks ago, maybe several months ago, about the chickens. Our exterminator retired, and we hired a new exterminator, and he came to our place, and he said, "I can't take care of your fire ants because you have chickens in your yard." And now I'm facing the fact that my beautiful yard may not be usable this summer because we can't exterminate fire ants. There are people that are feeding the feral chickens, and they're located in our yard. We had a trap about a year and a half ago, but nothing since then. My wife and I sat on our front porch and watched 14 roosters and hens get into the tree, and they're there. If the city wants to trap them, they can come at dusk any day, and you'll get a large number of the chickens. But I am concerned that the condition still exists. It's detrimental to the property values. It's detrimental to our use of our property, and would like to see something done, because I haven't seen anything being done lately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate you bringing those things to our attention, and I'm sure that we will address those as soon as we possibly can. The next person I have is David Bryant Perkins, who lives at 1307 Church Street. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, citizens of Bastrop. I just came back from India, and I may have an opportunity to be of service to the city because I'm traveling around anyway. But first, I wanted to make a public apology to my friend Forrest Chalmers. I heard that my mom raised a ruckus when he was trying to get his store to be a historical, and didn't sit well with me. Of course, I understand my mom, you know, something has to be built in 608 BC for it to be considered historical. But no, I just, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that just because she did that, I want it reflected, you know, on me. And like I said, I just found out about it a little while ago, and it was like, oh, great, well, that's going on. And I mean, I appreciate all the condolences and everything, you know, may she rest in peace, but, you know, you don't have to go and say all the wonderful things and everything that you did or whatever on there, because, you know, she's probably up there in heaven right now giving the good Lord a hard time, so, you know, we can all have her rest in peace on that. The thing that I wanted to tell you about, when I lived in Germany in the 80s and I lived in Poland in the 90s, I became involved with a thing called Sister Cities program. And I just wanted to just introduce it and, you know, hopefully come back again, and because I'm going to be in Texas here for a couple of weeks. It's a great program as far as doing exchanges. I mean, on all levels, business, government. For example, if the firemen and policemen wanted to go over to Germany to see how German policemen and everything do it, they have grants, scholarships. And some of the cities that I worked with did some amazing things by design. That is, you know, if they were doing a student exchange, they wouldn't just get any student. You know, they'd go to Latvia and get a guy that can kick a 50-yard field goal to help their football team. I mean, you know, if you do it by design, it can be very profitable. The program actually was started by Eisenhower, who I think he was worried about, as you know, the industrial complex, military industrial complexes being what's kind of happened is that everything has to go through the federal government. But he envisioned a thing to where a city can communicate with another city on a city level, so that you can do exchanges that way. What I think is beautiful about the program is that you just do whatever it is you guys want to do. It's not something that you have to do and you have to meet all these requirements. If you just wanted to do it exchanges, you know, for businesses, or like I said, with government, or that's totally up to you for whatever that you create. And I think I could be, you know, of service because I'm traveling around the world anyway, and I kind of see what somebody wants. As far as, like, you know, I noticed when I was driving down here from Dallas, there must have been about 100 empty school buses sitting on the side of the road being sold for $600. They would scream for those in, like, Thailand or or India. Because, to buy a new one, they just can't afford, but you get somebody here to fix them up. I mean, that's one idea. It's many ideas or your imagination on what you do exchanges as far as, something that you have here that they would just really love in India. Not cattle or beef, of course, but you're supposed to laugh on that because they don't eat cattle or beef over there. All right, but for example, to do, an exchange to where, they have curry and all these great spices and everything over there that you can find to be of use of here. But I think it's am I running over? Okay, well, I would like to, okay, I'm going to end it. I just would like to introduce it. I'd love to present a full, deal on the whole agenda, but more importantly, and I will send you all this, the link to the website on sistercities.org, and you can read the whole thing, all the programs you got, because I can come up here and talk for 3 days about how wonderful the program is. It's not going to be really effective unless you guys see what you want to do it, not only for the self as a government, but also for anybody in the city. I mean, as an individual person, to go, wow, that would be great that I could connect with somebody from another country and sort of start your own international department. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins. We appreciate that. The next person I have signed up to speak is M. Stephen Beard. Mr. Beard lives at 5408 Pointwood Circle, Waco, Texas. Mr. Beard, are you an attorney?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you being paid to speak tonight?
No.
Okay. And you have a document that you've asked us to, that you provided
I just gave each of you all that piece of paper. That's the same piece of paper I'm looking at.
Okay, well, I've got them all, and I'm going to be giving it to our city attorney for him to review before he gives it to city council. So your 3 minutes are we ready to go? Thank you, Mr. Beard.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you. I, again, appreciate the opportunity. I was here exactly 4 weeks ago tonight and raised significant issues. And while I asked for a meeting from any one of you all, the county, the school, whatever, no one responded at all. We did get the attention of the American Statesman, and they printed an article that I think is pretty accurate exactly where we are. I think the citizens of Bastrop need to know what's going on. I want total transparency. I don't want executive session. I want anything I say to be said in front of everyone. Everyone ought to hear it. The second issue that I bring up, the Bastrop Independent School District owns an undivided 67% roughly of these lots. We offered Mr. Ashley Munch about $1.7 million to buy their interest, $1,700,000. He turned it down, would not talk about it, and in fact paid, I'm not sure whether it was the county or the city, about $69,000 to get out of paying some legal fees in the lawsuit. Again, all I hear is how there's a shortage of money needed in the school district, and there's an opportunity to receive this money. You all please visit with him when he's not under oath, because his deposition will be taken. I've raised the same issue with your water control group that owns 10 lots. We tried to buy those at the price they asked us to pay, roughly $30,000, and Mr. John Kramer backed out at the last minute, gave no particular reason why. Again, Mr. Kramer will get a chance to discuss that. I'm asking you all, please have someone meet with us. Let's try to get this matter settled. It's settleable. We have all sorts of options and ways to get the matter behind us. Again, I ask for that from your group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beard. Appreciate it. All right, we are moving on to the consent agenda. Does anyone on council want any of the consent agenda items pulled? There are 3 items on. Does anybody in the audience want a consent agenda item pulled? Madam Secretary, if you'll read the consent agenda. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Council, I failed to bring to your attention that there was a set of new meeting minutes that had just a very, very minor correction. It was honestly just correcting who had said the pledge at last meeting. So the meeting minutes that you would be adopting would be the ones that are sitting at the dais in front of you.
Madam Mayor, move to approve the amended minutes and
Second.
as well as the consent agenda.
I have a motion to approve the amended minutes and the remaining of the consent agenda by Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second by Councilmember Ennis. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Yes.
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 Okay, Colin, we gave you all the time we could. We ready for 8A? All right. And I don't have to reread it because I already read it, right? Okay. We're on 8A, everybody. City Manager?
Mayor and council, at the last council meeting, Mark Schubach, who was with Strand and Associates, presented the proposed stormwater drainage ordinance. And it is literally like drinking from the proverbial fire hose. And at the conclusion of the meeting, we talked about breaking the drainage conversations down into what I affectionately called buckets. And there were 3 buckets: low impact development, stormwater management, and then water quality. And so the first of those buckets we will deal with tonight. The remaining 2 buckets we'll deal with on the 26th with the hope that we can bring an ordinance back for your consideration sometime in April. So one of the things that I found interesting, because honestly I had some things I wanted to understand. When we talk about low impact development, what does that mean and why do we care? We've spent quite a bit of time talking about how we have a drainage problem. And we've spent some time talking about geographically sensitive, because we have really 3 or 4 cities in one, depending on how you analyze Bastrop. So I called these geographic design standards because at the end of the day, that's really how we would use them if they were adopted. So at the February 26th meeting, there was some questions about the, I'm going to call it LID for short, the LID standards that we had put in the packet from Houston. The question was, are there some examples of LIDs close to home? And so with that, I spent a considerable amount of time learning this topic. So we're going to start at the beginning, very quickly talk about stormwater. What are the standards? What are the common examples? Some of the challenges, the quantifiable benefits, and some of the next steps. And so stormwater is real simple. It's just identified as water that originates during a precipitation event. It's not complicated. Part of this map helps us understand, and it's really the 8th grade science experience that we had, and I wasn't very good at science, so I learned some things by going back this, but this is the cycle of life. It's called the hydrological cycle produced by the NOAA Weather Service, and it's really the jet stream. It's how it rains, absorbs into the ground absorbs, vaporizes, and it feeds the clouds. And so it's just the cycle of Mother Nature. One of the things that's important to understand is about half of the rainwater that infiltrates land becomes groundwater in undeveloped watersheds. So if you're in a recharge zone, which we're not, that would matter. The other half, which we fall into, travels via overland to join streams and rivers and ultimately gets absorbed into the soil. This is why this matters. Human settlements have significantly altered land cover, changing the behavior of rainfall and land surfaces. And so in our built environment, we talk about impervious cover, but impervious cover, it's your paved roads, it's the other urban hardscapes that cause rain to fall and run off and do so in a quick manner. And so as more land surface develops, greater volumes of rainfall run off, at the expense of just being absorbed. And that's really the issue with stormwater management, is how quickly does it fall, move, and get absorbed and moved out. So one of the things that we're addressing in our current development standards is getting away from what we call urbanization, suburban sprawl. And part of the suburban sprawl development that we've experienced for the last 60 years is consumptions of land have resulted in increasing the amounts of watersheds being converted to impervious surface. And you look at a development and look at buildings and pavement and know that at one point in time it was vacant and now it has something on it. Our current stormwater infrastructure is regularly overwhelmed by storm flows that exceed design capacity. We currently build for a 25-year event. It's not uncommon for us to have a 100-year event. So the natural ratio of evaporation, infiltration, and runoff is imbalanced when you have more impervious cover than pervious cover. And that's the problem that we're attempting to address. The best example of what a low impact development is going back to Mother Nature and just allowing Mother Nature to absorb the water the way the water was intended. And that's just the very first sentence. It is developed to mimic natural systems. And so with that in mind, I want us to go back to 2011. You know, it's one thing to deal with low impact development when we're getting a lot of rain. It's another to remember how important it is when you're in a drought situation and you've managed to let nature work better because there's less impervious cover and there's more pervious cover for the rainwater to not run through quickly but yet get absorbed in the soil. So we suffer from that, so it's an important concept. There are 4 principles of LID, and that is slow it down, spread it out, soak it up, and distribute it throughout the watershed so it doesn't end up in a pipe. And when you have a lot of water that goes out in a pipe, it's fast moving and it can blow out the infrastructure. We see that at the corner of 95 and 71 every time we have a big storm event because the water is moving at such a large scale, it blows out the head wall there in front of Buc-ee's. So that's an example of where we have funneled the water to a place it moves, like I say, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. These are common elements of low impact development, and I specifically picked these because several of these are not Bastrop. I can't imagine that we would ever build buildings where there would be green roofs. I just don't think that would be authentic Bastrop. Rainwater harvesting is a maybe, but I think how it's designed and integrated with the buildings would be important. Just like if you go across the street to the Civic Center, we have some silos. Well, that's a great example of how that could be a rainwater harvesting system. It's an interesting thing, but design matters because if you have a bunch of rainwater barrels around town, we're going to say that's really not authentic Bastrop. The green streets and the bioswales could very well be something that would work for us. If they're designed right with the right plant material, it's just landscape. And it's how you use that landscape as far as the world sees it. It just looks like more open space, green material, but engineered, the mechanics of how it works underground is what makes it low impact development. So it's a nice happy medium. So part of the journey we have to take is to figure out what is low impact development, authentic Bastrop, and what's not. And there are a couple of examples on there that I already know just aren't, and a couple that if managed well could potentially be low impact development. One of the questions that was posed, or one of the challenges, is that we presented a document from Houston that was an example, and the comment was, we need to see something closer to home, something Central Texas. So I went out and found the Central Texas Water Sustainability Group that's based in Austin, and read a lot of their material and found it to be very helpful. And Central Texas has seen a very limited application of low impact development measures, even though they offer benefits and have applied with substantial success in other parts of the country. So one of the questions that's been posed to me, well, why haven't we used them? It's much like the journey we're taking on codes, a suburban sprawl model, and we're forcing us to take the journey to be fiscally sustainable because that's the right thing to do. But it's a journey, it's painful, and it's a lot of work. I anticipate that's why a lot of folks have not adopted low-impact development. It's different and it's change. But part of what the Central Texas Land Water Sustainability Forum determined was we have some regulatory conflicts. We design for the big storm and your traditional stormwater, and that makes it difficult sometimes to make low-impact development work. Enforcement concerns, maintenance, and long-term performance. When we have one product that doesn't work, we sometimes determine that the next product won't work either. We have a lot of detention ponds. I thought we had a lot, but we had a reason to attend a funeral today in Georgetown, and we happened to go down one of the main roads in Georgetown. There was detention ponds on every road, up at the street. And so there's always concerns, well, who's going to enforce maintenance? Who's going to make sure that they perform long-term just like they did when they went in? And that's a problem that hasn't been resolved. So then you project that onto low-impact development and say, well, if we're not taking care of this, who's going to take care of the lid? So the bottom line is that the low-impact development standards, if installed right, come with maintenance standards and ownership responsibility that I'm not sure were built into the criteria when traditional drainage was developed. There are really two kinds of problems in Central Texas. One is land development produces two kinds of problems. One, it increases the quantity and the rate of runoff flow, resulting in accelerated soil erosion and stream degradation, and then increases in the concentration of many potential harmful, I put constituents in there, but that's not what it really is. It's bacteria, heavy metals, it's the water quality portion of the context. And so our new ordinance is going to help address both of these potential problems. So what are the benefits of low impact development? And that's reducing pollutants introduced by the development. The soil, those plants act as a filter. And so when that water actually drains off and gets back into the Colorado River, we've seen some filtering. What's interesting in my studies is the watershed that's in Caldwell County has an E. coli challenge that they're trying to address. And low impact development standards help with those kinds of bacteria that find themselves in the water. And it also helps to reduce the volume and the flow rate of runoff so that we are back to that near pre-development levels, and it helps reduce the pollutants further. One of the things that I would like to pause here and talk about is sometimes low impact development is seen on a grand scale. And we have local property owners that are trying to put in a garage or they're trying to put in a patio. They're going to landscape it anyway, and they need to be able to figure out how to take care of the drainage. Well, low impact development standards that would be on a small scale would allow them to do that. And it just becomes landscaping in their yard. And that kind of helps with some of the pollutants and the runoff. It helps to protect the downstream water resources. One of the things that y'all have been abundantly clear about is when we have our wastewater treatment plant and we release our water into the Colorado River, we need to be good neighbors so that the folks that get our water downstream get good water. So that's something I know that's important as a value to this council. It also minimizes or avoids downstream flooding impacts. It's effective in preventing increases in peak flow and flooding impacts associated with the conventional development. That helps slow the volume of water down, reduce and possibly eliminate recourse to detention ponds. And the more area that we can develop and build helps with our fiscal sustainability versus dedicating these huge epic ponds to detention. It also allows for groundwater recharge. We're not in a district, but that is a benefit in some areas of central Texas that would be beneficial. The habitat conservation, this is important because there are areas of Bastrop where we are impacted by a habitat, whether it's the Houston toad or the fact that we benefit from the 15-mile stretch of the loblolly pines. Habitat conservation is something we need to take into effect in some of our geographically sensitive areas. And then water conservation gives us the ability to reduce water conservation, and that's something that shows up on both the water and the water purchases that we will do with Aqua and the actual purchases from us as a water purveyor. There is quite a bit of, excuse me, of, I won't say information, but there's quite a bit of reference to a couple of studies that indicate that homeowners and property owners pay a premium to be located to next to aesthetically pleasing amenities. Water features, open space, trails would qualify as that. And the reason for that is if you have open space that's dedicated to this, then you know that's not going to be built and you're going to be able to enjoy Mother Nature. It also helps increase the light yield because we're not dedicating unnecessary space for large detention ponds. So it becomes another option. And then the aesthetic value, it's landscaping, and again, it adds as an intricate part of the design standards. Public space, quality of life, and public participation. When you have the ability to do some of these smaller scale developments, you have people that can own that on a lot-by-lot basis versus having these epic detention ponds that nobody seems to own, nobody seems to be concerned about. So arguably, if we had them in public spaces like that or on private property, people would learn the benefits of water quality, learn the benefits of managing this at a local level, and that only helps us with our drainage problems. And then the native species preservation of insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, mammals. And I put this in there because we have an interest in being a bird city designation. And so the native species preservation is something that when we talked to y'all about the bird city application, this was one of the requirements that the Texas Parks and Wildlife had. And we talked about we would be able to do this because of the low impact development standards. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson challenged us to find something closer to home. And so part of the challenge we've got is low impact development standards have been adopted by a few cities, but they've been big cities. This has not been something that small cities have recognized as important, have not determined that is a part of a development purpose statement to ensure that they solve their drainage problems. So I was able to find Austin, Pflugerville utilized the city of Austin. Houston has put together its criteria, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio. You would expect the big cities. What you're not seeing here are some of your smaller cities. I just flat couldn't find that. So in an appearance to be open and transparent, I wanted to answer the questions, and this is what I found.
City Attorney, does Dripping Springs have one?
They have similar requirements embedded in their codes. They don't call it an LID.
They don't call it LID. Okay. Thank you.
Caldwell County Justice System proposed a plan to do some low-impact development standards. I'm told that this did not get built, but this was the closest project I could find where it was even being considered and talked about. One of the things that, so when I couldn't find any projects that were close to home, I went and looked for what I would call credible projects. Those things that aren't just marketing ploys, but those that have been vetted. So the Houston Land Water Sustainability Forum held a design competition in January of 2010. And it was a pretty well thought out event. There were 22 professional design teams that had architects, civil engineers, landscape architects. They were provided an opportunity to compete in one of three categories: single-family residential, urban redevelopment, and green roadway. The finalists were chosen by a panel of 5 expert judges. They were sent to final rounds, which required a 7-minute lightning round presentation to a room full of their colleagues and a panel of 20 jurors. And the jurors included local and national municipal and regulatory dignitaries and local property developers. So my takeaway from that was it was a fierce crowd. They probably came and they were looking for all of the reasons to ensure this didn't work. So I felt like if they could sustain all of that and walk away, there probably was some merit to what they had put together. All 9 finalists showed a reduction in flash flooding. They showed extraordinary water quality benefits, and they felt like economic advantages of low-impact development could be a major game changer. So this is a development called Camellia. It is in Fort Bend County. And what's interesting is that the top example is your very traditional, we call them loops and lollipops. And so it was going to require stormwater canals to manage the 100-year, 24-hour flood event. The lot yield at this proposed plan was 224 at a cost per lot of about $34,000 for a total construction cost of about $7.7 million. They went back and redesigned the property with a next generation biofiltration strategy. They got 99 more lots. They saved $13,500 per lot, and they reduced the construction cost by just under $950,000 when compared to the traditional methods. That's all fiscally sustainable, I believe, by our metrics. These are some examples of pictures. This is the stormwater channels that are built into the subdivision. This is a side view, and this is with it actually holding water. So it's a great example of how most of the time when it's not raining, it's a park. When it is, it functions the way it is. The water drains off. It goes back to being a park. So the results of this biofiltration strategy allowed engineers to use a smaller footprint, increasing the lot yield, and we talked about there being 99 more lots, lowered the development costs by just about $950,000. They reduced the contractor error during installation, and that is a huge problem that we struggle with on a large scale, is how do you make sure the contractor is actually installing it according to plans. It keeps the long-term maintenance costs low. 99% of the lots were amenitized by locations on green spaces, which was one of the things that this community was marketed for. And then there were some very obvious water quality reductions that happened. The next item is an auction house market, and it is a project that happens in New Orleans. So I appreciate it's not in Central Texas, but the reason that I picked this was it was a historical structure in New Orleans. And I love the heading. It says, "Going where no detention system has gone before." So clearly, if any of you are familiar with the topography of New Orleans, it's below sea level. So it's not surprising every time it rains, it fills up with water. So they've been challenged with managing stormwater in New Orleans since 1725. The old strategy, and it's across Louisiana, is you install pumps, and when it starts raining, you turn the pumps on and you pray that the pumps pump out water faster than it rains so that you can minimize the flooding. Well, post-Hurricane Katrina, they implemented a new stormwater ordinance, and it required all stormwater runoff to be detained and filtered on site. And while that sounds good in theory, the devil's in the details. So this is literally a historical structure that they took back to the walls, and they dug out the floor. And so this is a building in the Central Business District. It was over 150 years old. So they had some challenges. Clearly, they couldn't bring heavy equipment onto the property and risk damaging the foundation of this building. So they picked this particular, it's called an R tank. It's lightweight, flexible, and it allows 95% of the storage volume to be retained within the limited footprint, and it allowed the contractor to use hand tools to literally backfill until they could get in there with a skid steer and cover the top of the system. And my reason for pointing this out is we have historical downtown Bastrop, and clearly if they can do this in a building that's 100 years older than ours, it shows that this is an option everywhere. And that's what the floor looked like when it was completed. So at this point in time, my recommendation would be is that we need to build a geographically sensitive design standards because it really is essential to reducing the impact of the flood. And I think we can all agree that's the #1 challenge we have in town. I think we can also agree that not every lid choice is an option for Bastrop. It's just not going to happen. We need to fix it where construction of greenfield development is handled differently than infill development. Infill development has your traditional drainage, and so we need to give the property owner, the developer, some options. So at this point in time, I'm seeking some consulting assistance. I have a phone call scheduled tomorrow with a firm to see if they can help us. I know that there are countless numbers of low-impact development, many more than the 4 that I've showed you, but I think it would be helpful if we could vet out the things where you're just not going to work in Bastrop. There's no point putting it in a manual. There's no point really talking about it, and bring you back something that is geographic, that meets your purpose statement, that says it's authentic Bastrop. We haven't copied and pasted, and we've done something that makes sense for Bastrop long term. So we have yet another tool in our toolbox to begin to manage our drainage challenges. So, Mayor and Council, this completes the first bucket of our stormwater drainage to explain to the public what is lid, why it's a challenge in this area, and how we'd like to proceed.
Thank you very much, City Manager. Council questions? Councilmember Jones?
I just want to say I think you're definitely on the right track, because if you look at a lot of what I saw that you presented really goes hand in hand with how we initially saw a lot of the construction going in Bastrop. And so I feel really comfortable in telling you to keep moving forward in this direction. It's exactly what we asked for. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Councilmember Ennis?
I think it's important to be considering these this scenario because we're totally rewriting our development code, and it really goes hand in hand. I'm still flaming novice at this, so I'm having to kind of process it all.
Yes, sir, and when there aren't a lot of cities that have done this, there's a lot of novices among us. Yes, sir.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yeah, I think it's a viable option. I think we also need to look at the cons to this, and I'm still concerned about the increased maintenance and required landscaping. Certainly with our street program, if there's any underground amenities or underground portions of this, how's it going to affect our street maintenance? Long-term or big floods, is it going to increase the erosion? I think we need to look at it as an option, look at it a cost-benefit analysis perhaps over the long term. Do we have the capacity as a city to manage not only our own set of lids, but also the private sector? How do we manage the private sector versus the public sector? Can we absorb the cost of any of these new technologies? And I also think that if we're looking at our ETJ and working with the county and considering that Alston is upstream from us and dumping their effluents into the Colorado River when it comes down here, what about the inconsistent permitting requirements? I think it's a really big concept that we're trying to grab a hold of, and I do appreciate the work that was done on this, but only as a part of our flood mitigation and drainage issues. Just some thoughts and considerations.
Mayor Pro Tem, I think those are all very relevant, and I'm always about managing expectation. We are not going to fix drainage with the regulations you adopt. It is the first step. We've talked publicly about we have to get our regulatory side fixed, and we know for a fact it's broke, and y'all have been extraordinarily definitive in that in the emergency drainage ordinance that you've passed. We've also talked about next year we need to do a drainage study so that we can, now that we've got the regulatory side in place, the next step would be to do a drainage master plan, because that's going to drive the prioritization of investment and capital improvement projects. And then we will move to the regional flood standards. So all of the things you mentioned are absolutely the journey we're going to take, but it's going to take a couple of years. They're important, and we pledge to start with the regulatory piece, and that's what we're doing. So I appreciate all of your questions, because you've just outlined the next couple of years' journeys that we're going to have to do relative to that. One of the things that I'm very excited about is at the very next council meeting, Half Associates is going to be here to talk to you about the 2D model that we hired them to look at. And I am very encouraged with their findings and how they're, I think, going to be able to provide some capital solutions that will make sense. So I'm very excited about that coming to you, because all of this is part of that holistic conversation, and no one piece of this is going to solve the problem. It's the collective sum of all of this and the continued focus on drainage and moving forward to find a local solution, a city solution, and a regional solution.
Councilmember Rogers, any questions or comments?
Well, Mayor Pro Tem, that was some wonderful points, and I'm glad you brought those up. And I was happy to see that in the presentation that the city manager was aware of, that we're not going to have green roofs, and she was well aware of vetting some of the things that we are not going to do in Bastrop. So I appreciate at least knowing what we won't accept as we move forward to find out what we need to put in place.
Councilmember Peterson? So a couple of comments from me. I think it's interesting that you were doing some research on other towns our size and not finding it, and Alan saying, well, they don't call it lid. So sometimes names make people think certain things, and if they hear that you have lid designs and TCEQ has standardized list of BMPs, developers can make assumptions before they even read what's before them. So I'm not as interested in Bastrop having low impact design as I am in Bastrop having good Bastrop design. And particularly if we're still addressing, and I don't mean still, but knowing that enforcement and regulation is not already in hand, it seems to me that we need to do incremental steps and not step out there and cause ourselves undue problems with some of the points that Mayor Pro Tem Nelson brought up. So the idea of, I am very appreciative of the fact that infill and greenfield is two different sets of rules. I appreciate that we're talking about character districts that have geographically, there's things that make sense and don't make sense, but again, I don't think it's as important to have a chapter of our code that says lid as it is that we have a methodology that makes sense for Bastrop, and I would encourage us to incrementally adopt things. Even if we come up with our first drainage ordinance, we may not get it all exactly perfect to begin with, but I think it's important that we get the ordinance adopted and make some incremental changes. I know one option that has been mentioned before is if for instance, if we were at an impervious cover or a building type, and if a developer, based on the geographic topography of the property, wanted to maybe increase that, increase the building type, increase impervious cover, that if they utilized some of these features as a way to augment that impervious cover, that some of that can kind of make sense. It's interesting that the competition you're talking about was in 2010, and it hasn't taken off There's a reason for that. And I don't want that reason to be because people have think TCEQ, think green roofs, and we can't do that. And they've already said no before they understand what's going on. So if we don't call it LID, if we call it smart development, if it's an incremental, very logical, sensible part of our drainage ordinance, we get the end result without a lot of the anguish in between. In my opinion, I'd like to see us kind of go that route. Councilmember Ennis?
City manager, does that need to have a standalone designation, or can pieces of it just be incorporated in all of
That's exactly what I was going to say to the mayor. I like what she has said because we're just going to have drainage standards. And so if they happen to be, what do you call them, light impact, light imprint, low impact, geographically sensitive, I don't think it matters what they call if they work. And I think that there are some areas where in town where we all know this really makes good sense. We also know there's some areas in towns where this just doesn't make sense. And to your point, the character districts that we're working on gives y'all the flexibility to say, yep, it works here and we're just not going to do it over here.
I just want us to be really careful about mandating something and not understanding the consequences of that. And just like we talked about, we took some existing pieces of property in Bastrop to do what kind of development could you do within that footprint. I would be very interested in getting some of our local developers and engineers to say, okay, with this as an option, I would use it here. If you make me do these 4 things, here's an unintended consequence. Councilmember Jones?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that Linda made it really clear that she was going to pick and choose what worked for us.
I think that's a policy thing that council needs to be a part of making that decision.
I mean, that's in response to what we've asked, is what I'm saying. So
I think it's appropriate to get somebody that understands these to come and help you with that journey, because there will be some things, again, that I just know we're not, but there's some things in some additional research that don't typically show up as LID standards that I think would work for us, and I don't think we've talked about them, which is why somebody that's a specialist in this can bring to the table. But I think that this has been reduced in some people's mind to 6 or 7 things, and my research has shown it's a way bigger topic than just that.
And it's a topic that comes with some assumptions that aren't necessarily fair. So we absolutely need to be aware of that. So at the end of the day, I'm not as interested in LID as I am in appropriate drainage standards. Any other comments for city manager? Okay, how are you guys doing? It's 8:03. We have 2 more items. Can we keep going, or do we need a real quick bio break? We're wanting a bio break. It is 8:03 and we are in recess. We will resume at 8:10.
Because I didn't bring mine and I can't see that far.
Okay, it is 8:12. We have a quorum. We got everybody back on the dais, and we have 2 items left. We are going to do item 8B first. Receive presentation and hold discussion regarding the proposed framework and pattern book as part of the Bastrop Building Blocks Code revisions with Matt Lewis at Simple City Design. Matt?
Good evening, Mayor, Council, City Manager. My name is Matt Lewis with Simple City Design. Tonight we are here to talk about a continuation of the effort of building Bastrop. We have been hard at work writing the individual codes, which we are calling the Bastrop Building Block Code. It goes back to the foundational elements which this town was founded on. You'll notice what we are proposing as character districts. You'll notice that those are the existing city limit boundaries, and these individual character districts are paying homage to the place types that are on the ground now, the particular elements of development as they are on the ground, as well as the past heritage, for example, the Cattlemen's District, to pay attention to the characteristics of how that district would come to life. Essentially, what will be happening with this is there will be individual place types that will be coded to these character areas. And the place types go from less intense to intense zones, from natural to rural environments, to suburban environments, to mixed housing and residential environments to a Main Street type of environment, as you see in your downtown area. Within each of these districts, you will have a variety of place types. And the place types will have individual characteristics which are representative of the patterns of the development on the ground. April the 10th, we will be coming back before the council to gather insight about these individual place types and the characters within the character zones that are established within these districts. Each of the districts are represented by physical characteristics on the ground, whether it be topographic constraints. You'll have the Houston toad habitat, which is called the Lost Pines District, which will have different development patterns and development standards that would apply to those individual characteristics in those zoning areas. You have the North End District, which we are in the process of really evaluating now to extract those details where parks go, the street patterns, building types. And within each of these various elements, we'll be mapping those on the ground so that it gets applied within this map. The physical characteristics of these boundaries are really critical to achieve the geographically sensitive nature, which we are all trying to accomplish with the consistency, alignment of the policy decisions, the plans, your mission statement, as well as your policy statement that you all recently adopted for this effort. The water district, for example, will have a variety of building types and building patterns which would be representative for that individual district. Linda, if you have any,
Yeah, one of the things that, as he gets into this, I want to talk about some of the names because these are things that y'all will be asked to debate at the April 10th meeting. One of the things that y'all have been crystal clear about is that whatever we do has to be authentic Bastrop. So we spent some time really looking at the community, and downtown is downtown. Cattleman's is the area around Burleson Crossing, and that's kind of a tip of the hat to the cattle farmers that are out there that have been raising cattle for years. Old Town, excuse me, Old Town is part of the downtown area, and what we see that as being is possibly kind of a transition area. Where you have residential, but yet you've got residential houses that are now being converted to attorney offices or accountants. The north end is North Bastrop, and y'all may just determine that's what we're going to call it. The new addition is exactly that. That was the 1940s addition that everybody in town calls the new section. The River District and the Water District run parallel. The River District is going to be the west side of the river. That is all of the land that's going to run along the river so that it can be developed with the river as the central theme. The Water District is on the Water Street side of the river. So that it kind of, again, it's already developed with some of the historical flair. So as you deal with the place types and what this ultimately looks like, you will make that unique to the area. Dropping down to the Cultural Arts District, that was one of the designations in the form-based code, and that's what this area here is called. And so a lot of the activity and the plans that have gone into this area, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it works as the cultural arts area, and we left it that way. Riverside Grove, that's what it is. Riverside Grove and Hunter's Crossing are going to be left with those names because they're planned developments, and they have their own character that's defined by how they were built, and they don't integrate well with others, so they'll be their standalone character. The Lost Pines area is the Houston toad habitat. It's the loblolly pines. And that's a great example of where we've talked tonight about drainage. I anticipate what y'all will want to do in the Lost Pines area won't be what you'll do in the Meadows. And the Meadows is the area around 304 and 71 where Seton Hospital has been built. It's been hayfields, it's been rice, and so it was kind of a Meadows theme. So again, we went back to what that looked like. So this kind of gives you a sense of some of the reasons for the names of the character zones, but each one of them, I think when you really think about it and study it, you'll see it really is its own ecosystem for whatever reason. It might be the topography, it might be its history, it might be how the citizens view it and see it, but we try to be respectful of authentic Bastrop and not make it something it wasn't.
We saw this for the first time tonight. How many districts are there?
There are 18 districts.
And how many place types are there?
There are 5 place types.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And the individual place types are going to be representative of these districts. And the street types, there will be a variety of street types that a developer or a builder could select that would be appropriate for the individual place types and the individual character zones. And so we're working through those standards, which we will be introducing to you all soon. And we will hopefully get some of these place types landed and applied within these districts on the April 10th meeting. And we're setting the schedule for that with the city now.
Matt, you're calling them districts, but it feels like they could be, they're going to kind of become their own neighborhoods. Is that another way of thinking about it?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great way of thinking about it. These are their own neighborhoods with their own individual identity, if you will.
Matt talked about the April 10th meeting, and so while we're here and we're talking about this, that's going to be, I think, a very exciting day. One of the things that is in the fiscal sustainability portion of your policy statement is the fact we need a gridded network. And as a part of the comprehensive plan, the City Council at the time adopted a transportation master plan. And our transportation master plan incorporates a lot of transportation elements. Some of them belong to Bastrop County, some of them belong to TxDOT, some of them belong to Campo. But Chapter 5 in the transportation master plan is solely Bastrop, and it's the city's thoroughfare plan. And so we're going to hire Kimley Horn to come in and help with the gridded network. Tom Grant with Kimley Horn will be here on the 26th of March to present to you what that will look like. And then on April 10th, in addition to the workshop you're going to have with Matt, we're going to have a transportation rodeo, because we need citizen and development input to make sure that the gridded streets go where they make sense. And if they don't make sense, let's not put a gridded line on a map where they don't belong. It kind of defeats the geographically sensitive principles of what we're working toward. So on the 10th, Tom Grant and one of his co-workers, Drew, will be here in town. They'll lead the transportation rodeo on the 10th. From 6 to 7 will be dedicated to the transportation grid network of this, and then from 7 to 9 or 9:30, Matt will be back to talk about this. So there's going to be a lot of activity between now and the 10th with the parking conversation we're going to have, the storm drainage standards. We're also working on street light standards. All of these are going to be necessary standards that you apply to these character zones. So we've got a lot of work coming at you, but these are critical pieces so we can begin to make those decisions.
Just want to clarify for the community that the council meeting is on Tuesday, April 9th, and this night that you're talking about is a Wednesday night. It would be a special meeting on Wednesday night.
And we will be working closely with Kimley Horn to ensure that the standards that they come up with align with these standards for the individual characteristics for these place types and the districts as well.
Mayor, do you mind if I bring something up right now, please? Please. Okay, so something else I really want us to keep in mind is, for example, as time's moved on, the city's put in some parking areas through town, and I would like to have these parking areas named. And initially, you know, for example, the Cervantes lot over there behind, where the advertiser used to be, in honor of Pete Cervantes, who had the Pete and Sons for years. maybe the Lock lot over where Lock Drugstore was, maybe the Saunders lot over there by where Nancy's Cards and Gifts was for many, many years, and it was like literally the only place in town you could buy a gift, and also coming up with the names for the alleys. And I thought about Hoover Alley just because where the Hoovers have built that, development over there. Don't know about the other side, don't know about the library lot, but I just think that it would help us if we named some of these areas that we're coming up with. And, I know we've got Fisherman's Park, we've got Delgado Park, we've got Joel Hodges Park. I just think it would be real helpful for us to incorporate that in. It gives the citizens an opportunity to maybe have some input into those names, but I just initially, just in a way of promoting downtown, and if people have any ideas for people that they'd like to recognize for some of the, their contributions to the downtown businesses, that's something that, we definitely would like to hear. But I want us to look at naming these as we move along instead of us I'm constantly having to explain to people about parking, and it's just like, it's very difficult when you don't have any names. Lot number 4 doesn't really work very well. So,
Mayor and Council, if y'all are good with that, I think that's an awesome way to be authentic Bastrop, and I think Councilmember Jones has raised a very valid point. As we market our areas to citizens and visitors, for those of you that are fifth generation Bastropians, you know that Lock Drugs used to be on Main. For those of us that got here 2 years ago, if there wasn't a sign still up, I would know that. So it would be a great way to name these parking lots so that they aren't just the parking lot over there. So if that's something that y'all would be interested in, we will work toward figuring out how to do that efficiently and roll that in that, because I think that's another cool layer to making this authentic Bastrop and making it specifically to what works for us.
Council, are you okay with that? I think as we establish these new neighborhoods, and quite frankly, like Riverside Grove is Riverside Grove and Hunter's Crossing is Hunter's Crossing, so it might be a good idea to have some names suggested from the folks that live there as we have additional, the potential to name a small park or whatever, and just know that as there's items that they could be themed to that neighborhood, that might be a helpful thing to do.
Yes, ma'am. Sweet.
Okay.
Oops, I don't have my clicker. The next element we wanted to introduce to you all tonight is what we're calling a pattern book. And a pattern book talks about the architectural elements of the individual districts and characteristics. It would be addressed...
Colin, feel free to zoom in because, thank you. and maybe even some of the words on the bottom so we get a little bit of... Thank you very much. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Sure. Oh, no problem. And some of the elements that would be articulated in the pattern book would be massing and how it relates to the structures around it, facade design and how the actual design characteristics relate to the streets and the buildings and how those two interact together. Establishment of ground floor requirements of maybe glazing at the ground level, certain percentages in appropriate place types. So example, you may have glass requirements at your ground floor, retail buildings, for example. One of the elements that we're introducing in the code is new building types. I believe we've got over 20 new building types we'll be introducing to Bastrop so that the community can start to reintroduce some of the building patterns they have in the downtown district outside of the downtown district. With those building types, though, it's imperative that the characteristics align to authentic Bastrop, fiscally sustainable, and geographically sensitive. And so as we prepare and go through these exercises, this is a heavily topic that we need input on from the policymakers and from the community. Open space will be required through this, and the relationship from the pattern book will be a subset of the Building Bastrop Code. all of the standards and the development standards within the pattern book will directly link back to the code so that there are no conflicts that get created through this. But furthermore, there's going to provide options rather than regulate things out. It's going to code things in and provide them clarity for developments as they move forward. This is an integral part of something that you all don't have in your current development regulations. You don't regulate at this level. You could look at some of your development regulations as architectural elements, but this would be something new that would be being introduced into Bastrop at this point. Let's see, one more page on this. Some of the elements, again, linking the standards to the B3. Architectural styles would be determined by place type, and the architectural standards would be regulated within the pattern book and not the actual development code. It would be a separate standalone document, but again, ensuring that no conflicts get created at the time that this is integrated through this procedures. So.
Excuse me, so you're saying that you basically are having two documents that work together?
Yes, ma'am.
And so that way you can easily and maybe alter the pattern book if you find that there's things that aren't working?
That's correct.
Okay, good.
Yes, ma'am.
And council member, that's a great point. And what we are finding is that certain aspects of the code are repeated, and if you don't know they're there, then they don't get fixed and they become the conflicts. So the premise behind this is that things will be referenced, but you'll have to go back to the source document to get it. So to your point, when it's amended, it's one document and it then carries forward. And I think that moving forward, it'll be a great way to ensure we don't create the circumstances we find ourselves in today.
City Manager, could you, if you'll forgive us for a minute, digress, could you tell that little story about your trying to find some drainage?
Yes, I went to our Code of Ordinances and I went looking for the drainage standards, because you would think if you were looking for drainage standards, they'd be called drainage standards, wouldn't you? So I went to the Code of Ordinances and I clicked on the link that said drainage standards, and I pulled them up. My first clue, there was only 6 pages, and I thought, well, surely not. So I copied them and I sent a global email to staff and said I went to the Code of Ordinances and I clicked on the obvious link that said drainage ordinance or drainage standards. I'm sure these aren't all of them, and Jennifer, bless her heart, said, oh no, and she listed 6 more links in places that I wouldn't have gone looking for drainage, and she knows about it because she uses the code, but they're not intuitive. So the goal is that when you click on drainage standards, all the drainage standards should be there. Because if you find them, there's nothing to suggest that you should go somewhere else looking for drainage. So that's what we're dealing with.
I'm here to answer any other questions. We just wanted to introduce these concepts, let you know about the April 10th meeting so that we can really start to flesh through these ideas, land these place types on the individual patterns, and so we can really dive into these districts.
City Manager, you want to visit a little bit about how you see planning and zoning and their role as we're getting these pattern books? Because that was something that was in the presentation.
Yes, and so part of the meeting on the 26th, they are going to, they're on the 28th, March 28th. That's when the Planning and Zoning Commission meets. Matt Jones, who's our Director of Planning and Zoning, is going to work with Planning and Zoning. They have been asking to update the comp plan because one of the requirements is that we update that annually. There are a couple of chapters that are really dedicated to the land use piece of that. One is transportation. So once we have our code rodeo, Planning and Zoning Commission will work with the transportation piece, i.e. the grid, to make some recommendations so that it comes to council fully vetted. And there will be pieces that P&Z will vet of these character districts and place types, but part of what Planning and Zoning has to have is policy direction, because they are a policy recommending board to council. So part of the conversation that we will have as an outcome of the 10th meeting is there will be things that are going to be obvious land use issues, obvious transportation issues. Those rest with planning and zoning. But there are going to be some other things that you're going to deal with, like nuisance standards, because we're not going to regulate use, we're going to regulate nuisance. Well, that's a code enforcement issue. That rests with council. We're going to deal with light standards, because we're hearing from folks in the community that they want to see walkable light standards so that they feel safe getting out walking in the evening. So a light standard is something that y'all will deal with as a policy issue, because that's regulated by BP&L. So we will be taking some things to P&Z that are land use and transportation related, and then other things that, as my husband likes to say, affects your check. You get paid the big bucks to make the policy things. We'll be bringing back to you. But the big things that P&Z will be working on right away will be the transportation thoroughfare plan, and then once you give Matt some direction on the framework, i.e. the character zones and the place types, then they'll get off in the weeds and vet through those, and then they'll come back to you as a final recommendation.
Council, any further questions for Mr. Lewis?
So bottom line, we're on our way.
Yes, sir. We're on our way.
And as the city managers told us, it's going to be like drinking out of a fire hose, right?
Yes, sir.
So you think you might have something for us
Thank you.
to look at by May?
For the draft codes, yes,
Some
ma'am.
draft codes, yeah.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Draft codes.
The heavy lifting is the character zones and the place type, and once you give him some policy direction, because those are things that he can't decide for you. So that's why that April 10th meeting is so exciting. Once y'all offer that direction, you reserve the right to change your mind, but it's guidance. And so that will really then begin to craft the conversation. To the mayor's point, we'll know what to send to planning and zoning, and then as we deal with some of these other policy things like parking, the nuisance issues, the street standards, and we've got a list of them. The international codes that we'll be bringing back on March 26th that will go to the Construction Standards Board. All of this will be fluid. All of it ends up at you, but you will divvy it out to the various appropriate places to help vet it, make recommendations, and bring it back. But until we get that piece done, we're doing a lot of work, but nothing comes forward. So it's like the rabbit that the boa constrictor ate. Once you free it, it's the fire hose. That's the only description I can give you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we're moving on to item 8C, our last item tonight, Council. Update and discussion regarding the Old Iron Bridge with Brian LaFoy of Kimley Horn. Mr. Pallady.
I'm going to preempt Jerry, and I'm going to do it for him.
Okay.
What you're going to see...
Good to see you, Jerry.
What you're going to see tonight is going to be an epic shock and awe. We owe you an update, because when Brian came in December, we knew we had a dangerous structure. He talked to you at that time about the inspection process that they were doing, and he told you that he would be back tonight, or he would be back soon with the results, and that's what tonight is. The shock and awe is that some of these options come with pretty hefty price tags. We as staff are not prepared tonight to talk to you about funding or finance. Please know that we've already met with our financial advisor. And so we are working that angle, working with our bond counsel, and we have staff looking for opportunities for grants. And we're going to have to get creative on how we get out of our box to make this happen. So as soon as you see the price tag, you're going to turn to me and go, okay, great, how are we going to pay for this? And I'm going to just tell you up front, we hadn't got there. So just absorb what he has to say, because we owe you the update. And then in the summertime, when we are dealing with budget and we have a context, we plan to have a plan to present to you for conversation. So this is just an update.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members, Madam City Manager. Thank you for having me here this evening. It's good to be back again. I wanted to just briefly start by reminding you of what we were tasked to do quickly and where we are at this point. So if you remember last time, we talked about this being a two-step process, and we've gone through the evaluation phase before we kind of decide what the options are before we can go into a specific rehabilitation mode. So where we ended last time was we finished the field evaluation, and that's when we reported to you the last time on what we had on our initial findings based on being out on the bridge itself. Now at this point we've gone through the analysis and we've also developed the report, and that's what we're here to discuss with you tonight. So if you'll remember, as the evaluation process, the different parts of the structure that we looked at. On the approach spans, which are the 2 concrete sections coming in, we looked at the deck, the beams, the substructure. On the truss itself, we looked at the members above the deck, the concrete surface itself, and then what was underneath, the framing, the floor beams, etc. And also the concrete piers that the trusses are supported on. Well, what did we find? So we talked to you about the spalling at the beam ends on the approach spans, also some spalls up underneath where the beams connect to the substructure themselves, some significant corrosion and spalling on the overhangs. Now, all of these look pretty bad, and that's because I've shared with you the worst cases to make the point, but these are all pretty straightforward repairs for this part of the bridge. There's nothing that's out of the ordinary on how we would approach either restoring the structure to its original integrity or even strengthening it for that matter. So pretty straightforward to this point. In the truss section itself, we found a lot of deformations in the cross bracing members. Some of that was due to impact at some point from vehicles at a particular time. Some of it we just could explain why those deformations were there. Other areas where the cross members were, we found some deformations and some bending there. And also in some of the stitch members, there was some deformations that you can see in those. Again, these look somewhat bad, but they're really not in this portion of the truss. They're actually pretty straightforward, again, to fix and rehabilitate, and aren't really the driving force of why the bridge needs to be fixed to the extent that it does. If you'll recall also, we talked about how unique a truss is and the fact that every member is either in tension or compression. And we talked about this being a fracture critical structure, meaning that tension components are critical enough that if any one were to fail, it could cause some level of failure of the structure or catastrophic failure of the bridge. And in particular on this bridge, we talked about the gusset plates along the bottom of the bridge where all the members come together in one place, and the level of corrosion that we identified there. And some of the gusset plates had complete holes, 100% section loss, all in some of those areas. And then finally we identified some lead, which we already had an indication that there would probably be some lead on the bridge, but we did verify that this is lead-based paint on the bridge, and so this would have to be treated as a lead abatement project. So we took all that information and we put together a report that we've presented to staff, and want to just go over kind of briefly the content of what's in that report. And the way we kind of categorized the different elements of the bridge was assign them a number. And the Federal Highway Administration uses this, the National Bridge Inventory, and that's how they categorize the different components of the bridge. So this is mainly just for your kind of a mental picture to be able to distinguish kind of what level of seriousness each of the elements are. So for the approach spans, consisting of the deck, superstructure, and substructure, all in fairly decent shape. Let me back up for 1 second. So what that rating is, it's basically rated from 0 to 9, 9 being a bridge in excellent condition, really nothing wrong with it, 0 being a failed condition, so really 1 is kind of the bottom level of basically critical condition, imminent failure for a bridge. So that's kind of the range. So you have kind of 5 through 9 is fairly decent, 3 and 4 is kind of serious condition, and you don't want to certainly be below that at all. So the approach spans...
Excuse me, what does NBI mean?
National Bridge Inventory.
Thank you.
Pretty good shape for the approach spans themselves, 5s and 6s. The main truss sections, the deck is in fairly decent shape. The overall substructure rating is a 3, and that drops us into that serious condition. And the reason is that lower chord that we talked about in the gusset plates, and you see the holes from the section loss in there. This is a picture that we had in the previous report where you're not looking at a pile of dust and debris there. That's actually flaking steel from the gusset plates that's corroded off. This is a chart that's in the report, and what this indicates is all of the gusset plates that have some level of 100% section loss in them to some degree. And so the 2 columns to look at are, that basically quantifies the area of each gusset plate. So you can see the ranges. There's some that even have up to 24 square inches of section loss in that gusset plate. So quite significant to be able to look at that. Talking about the lead paint, the federal regulation limit for lead in a coating is 5,000 parts per million. We took 8 samples on the bridge in various places, and the highest reading we got was 130,000 parts per million. So again, not a surprise that there was lead, but this is a very hot bridge. 5 of the samples did meet regulatory requirements, but 3 of them were over significantly. So we took all this information and in our analysis portion, we evaluated 3 scenarios. The first scenario was basically looking at the original design capacity of the bridge as it was designed, to give us a baseline of where we could go from there to understand what the loss of the capacity was and where we needed to go for any improvements. The second scenario was looking at the current condition and saying, okay, based on the original design and the findings that we had in the field, so for example, we take, okay, we have a gusset plate that has 75% reduced capacity, we apply that to the new modeling that we did, and so we were able to come up with a reduced capacity for that bridge. We did that for both the original structure and as if it was just a pedestrian bridge as it stands today. And then the third scenario is the proposed conditions that we looked at for options for rehabilitation. That first one is to restore the bridge to a unrestricted pedestrian bridge, or as another option, potentially some type of a deck park with pedestrian amenities on it. So in looking at the truss, just as an example, when we go in and we model it, everyone's labeled. It has a different designation so that we know where we're talking about. And as an example, this actually came from, I think, the scenario where we looked at just the strictly pedestrian load. As an example, this particular truss member had a load rating of 0.674. 1 and above means it's okay. So that tells us that there's a reduced capacity there. And this particular one was identified as damaged and out of plane. So basically it was one of the bent members that we showed you in one of the pictures. So anytime it's bent or out of distortion like that, it has a reduced capacity. As another example, this was one of the cross members that had a rating of 0.877. That one actually didn't have enough of capacity in its original state to be able to do what we want to do in the proposed conditions. So what that means is that member has to either be replaced or strengthened. So the first one, if it's just bent, there may be ways that we can go in and flame straighten it or do some other things to leave that member in place and still get capacity back. This one, we would have to replace it or strengthen it in place. That's what that tells us. And then finally, this is a little bit of the good news. Some of the gusset plate areas that we looked at, this one in particular, although it had 59% capacity reduction in the gusset plate, it still had a rating above 1. So what that means is it had a lot of redundant capacity when it was designed. So that helps significantly. So what that tells us later on in some of the report that we've done is we don't have to replace all of the gusset plates as we initially thought just by our field investigation. So some of these could just be strengthened and not necessarily have to completely replace it and shore and frame for doing that.
How do you know what the capacity is?
We base it on the steel, the type of steel it is, the size of it, the thickness of it, and what the loads are coming down to it and how those translate.
Okay, thank you.
They built them to last in the old
days. They did, and we found that in a lot of old bridges that they're pretty darn tough. So recommended options is where we are now. So the first option I mentioned, a pedestrian bridge with no restricted loading. We talked about in the last meeting that there wasn't a desire to have Bastrop's finest at the end of the bridge, counting pedestrians as they go on. So having an unrestricted loading requirement is what we took away as one of the desires. So what I mean by this is no restricted but possibly narrower width is right now you've got a certain width on the bridge. Well, we may be able to restrict them without restricting them. So what I mean by that is basically narrow the pathway that pedestrians are allowed to go, bring that railing in, because right now we haven't done enough analysis to know for sure if we can unrestrict the bridge at the full width it is. We're fairly confident that we can do it by bringing it in a little bit. And it also depends on how far we go to strengthen certain members, how much we replace, and I'll get into that at the end on why that's important. But so it's some kind of a range. As we can do this, it's just a matter of how wide is it full width, or do we have to come in a couple feet to be able to do it. Second option is pretty similar. Again, no restricted loading, but possibly narrow width for a deck park. And what does a deck park mean? That's kind of up to you to tell us on how you want that to be envisioned. And so that goes down to, is it a few benches for pedestrian with some shade features? Are there some play areas? Are there some other features, planters, things like that have varying loading? That depends on how much we need to strengthen versus replace and affects the width that we can accommodate as well too. Third option is demolition. Based on what we see and present for funding, that's a consideration for you as well. So options 1 and 2, the scenario and kind of sequencing of how that would happen would be to first remove the concrete deck, repair the required structural members based on what we decide to be the loading, go back in and blast and recoat the paint on the bridge, replace the concrete deck, and then rehabilitate the approach spans as necessary for that. That's kind of the sequence of events on how that would happen. So now the costs associated with those, these are some cost ranges just because of the variance of what I've discussed. So, and we base these on the full width of the bridge, assuming that we could possibly do that. So for option
and
one,
I want to put an asterisk. This is just the construction. This doesn't pay for the design.
Design fees
It is in this?
Yes, it is. Yes, ma'am.
Man, awesome.
This is everything together.
You're on tape, Brian.
It is. It's on paper now. But this is based on the full width of the structure being repaired. So the ranges and the durations of time to give you an idea of what this entails for the two options and also two different demolition options as well. So we did have a discussion with staff on the possibility of phasing some of this work and how that might look. So we broke out the different major elements and sequencing that I just talked about by cost as well, and that's what you see here. So for example, you could come in and say we might, as phase one, come in and just remove the concrete deck. That has its own challenges because the deck does serve a purpose structurally. So if we did that, we would have to still provide some kind of lateral stability during that time before you started that next phase, as an example. Next phase might be to go in and replace all those structural members in the bridge. Phase 3 might be to go in and blast and recoat the structure once all the members have been repaired. Next phase might be to go back and replace the deck, and then finally rehabilitate the lightweight concrete. Although that looks good on paper, there's really not a good way, for an economy of scale perspective, to really do that because you're leaving it for a long period of time, depending on how the contract with the contractor is structured. If you have a single contractor, they're leaving equipment and materials in place for a long time that you'll pay a premium on. If it's different contracts, you're having to pay for a different contractor to assess his risk and put that into his bid. So there's really, although you can split it up, I wouldn't recommend it because there's just really not a good way to. This is just an example of another truss bridge. It is a Parker truss bridge that was rehabilitated, similar to what this one was. This is up in Minnesota. This is courtesy of a contractor that we've been discussing this project with, just to kind of validate some of our thoughts. And this is one of the initial thoughts that we had. As you can see, what they've done is built basically independent truss bridges to support the bridge in question itself. And so this is what drives a lot of the cost, is this is the kind of thing that needs to happen to be able to rehabilitate a bridge like this. We think we have worked out a way to not have to do this, so costs would even be a little bit more than what we've shown if we had to do this method here. But right now, because of the fact that we found some of the gusset plates don't have to be replaced, that we think we can strengthen them, we think we can design some shoring to not have to go through this level of design on here. And there's kind of a close-up of what you can see on either side on how they've supported that structure. As far as the blasting and coating, this is kind of what it would look like as well. This is the containment system that you might expect to see out there, where it's completely shrouded and has its own framework system as well to be able to support that and support all the material and the coating that comes off of that, because all that blast material and that slag has weight, so it has to be captured and carried off as well. So I just wanted to show those to you, kind of just give you some perspective on similar bridges that you might expect to see on this one. And finally, I want to just give you a little bit of information on what it means as far as this being a historic structure. So for a historic bridge like this, anything has to be coordinated through the State Historic Preservation Office. And for Texas, that's the Texas Historical Commission. And they have 2 reviews required for repairs of a structure like this. The first is through the Department of the Interior for Standards of Rehabilitation. And what they look at is basically 7 elements of a historic property's integrity. And those are the elements that I've listed there right now. And they make sure that it's in harmony with what we're doing for the rehabilitation. The second is through the State Antiquities Act, and they're more concerned with the preservation of artifacts and making sure that they're not disturbed as well. So some general other requirements that are going to be important for this is they're concerned with the design, materials, and workmanship of the repairs to make sure that they're in harmony with what's already there. They prefer, obviously, to repair in lieu of replacement. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about. Can we straighten a member and get capacity back rather than just take it out and put a new member back in? Also, the same thing with match materials in kind. So, for example, if a particular member is what we call a C channel, they have an IB. They want us to stay with a C channel if at all possible. So those are the kind of things that they look at to make sure that we're staying kind of in concert with what the original intent of the design was, to maintain that historic look. A big one that we're going to need to look at on this particular project is we can't replace more than 50% of the members to maintain its historic significance on the register. And keeping in mind that some of the members have already been replaced on that bridge over time from previous repairs. So we need to consider that on how we move forward to be able to make sure that we can maintain that.
Brian, is your analysis on those, do you feel like you can do that?
On quite a few of them, yes, we can.
The historical aspect, do they have any other teeth that they can use on us from doing what we want to do, outside of removing it from a listing?
If I understand your question correctly, I think the big separators, they're pretty willing to work with you as long as you're trying to do the right thing. In worst case, if you decided you couldn't preserve the bridge, you could take the bridge down and they would be okay with that. The big separator seems to be that if there's federal dollars involved, that puts you into a different category of requirements, and those are a lot stricter to be able to have to follow.
Sure. Federal
funding.
I do have a question for you that I didn't ask when you were going through it. Demolition of truss spans only. Why would you want to do that?
Just an option if you wanted to maintain the approach spans as some kind of a deck park on their own, where someone could walk out, and you could possibly add a walkway between the approach span and the other sidewalk on the newer bridge, and kind of have just as an option.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
But
save some money.
But two dead ends.
Pardon me?
But two dead ends.
Well, it wouldn't have to be a dead end. You could actually create a walkway from the end of the approach onto the new bridge where the sidewalk is to make it continuous. So that's a summary.
We told him to come up with every option. It's just an option. Not a good option, but an option.
So that's a summary of where we are at this point right now.
Well, I personally would like us to, I know we don't have the funding figured out, but I would certainly want to move forward with the deck park idea. I think it would give us more options. It might give us more opportunity than if it was just a pedestrian bridge. And it also, if you looked at designing it just with different kind of benches and landscape features, it could also limit how many people were on the bridge, so that's just what I was thinking.
Mayor and council, I think it's important, without getting off into a conversation on funding, but there's about $500,000 difference between a pedestrian bridge and a deck park. And $500,000 at $12 million is, while it's money, it's an investment into what do you do with the bridge, and how do you recoup the quality of life and the priceless memories that go for it. One of the things in talking to Brian, the deck park may be a good way to help manage the load, because you can incorporate the features, and by virtue of the features, regulate where the pedestrians go and manage the load by function of how you design it. So it could be that the deck park solves some other issues, allows us to program it. It is the most expensive option, but again, you have to look at the difference between just a walking bridge and being able to program and do something different. But those are conversations that we will bring back to you relative to the financing. I think the comment that I made, I will end with, and that is that this is a really significant investment. But I think we can all agree that this bridge is as authentic Bastrop as you can get. It's on every picture I have seen of Bastrop. It is, you see that in the opening of every video we do. It's on the Visit Bastrop logo. So I think that staff is taking the approach that taking this bridge down is not an option. We may ultimately end up there, but it will be with, we'll end up there after a lot of thoughtful deliberation, a lot of fundraising and all that goes with that. So this is just a conversation we're not going to have one night. It's going to be a lot of conversations. It's going to be strategic. It's going to have a lot of elements. And so we appreciate that, and we'll be bringing this back to you in budget.
Brian, I think you did just an outstanding job and took something that's fairly complex and made it where it's very easy to understand what you guys are analyzing. And we also know that on the deck park, not every feature has to be dirt that has to be watered with an irrigation system. There are other features that can allow it to be a deck park that we don't have to make things harder on you from a dead load standpoint intentionally. And also placement can make all the difference in the world. As far as one thing I want council to kind of get a feel for, I think it's a perfectly good idea to narrow it in. That's a very obvious, cheap. We hardly ever use the full width, and certainly in the condition that it's in, don't need to be using the full width. So the idea of narrowing it down as a means to be able to, I prefer that way over meandering over to the new bridge and back on the approaches. Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I have no objections about setting up a GoFundMe page so we can fix this bridge, because I have some interesting stories about that old iron bridge that was before the new bridge was built. So we definitely want to preserve this bridge.
I think it's really important for the community to realize that it's not, how would you spend that, why would you consider spending that amount of money to repair or refurbish the bridge? It is not free to demolish it. So although we're looking at $8.5 to $10.5 million, or even all the way up to $11 million, it can be $5 million to tear it down. So that kind of puts it in perspective. And when you were talking about the THC requirements, all I was thinking about was how many grants can we get from them. I think each and every one of us needs to start finding folks who love bridges and rattle the trees and get some money raised for the effort. That can be a focus for all of us as we move forward. But none of that can happen without the analysis that your company's done. I really appreciate that. Councilmember Ennis?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess this should go to the city manager, but Brian, you might talk to her about it. I know it's not in your original charge, but wouldn't it behoove us to have an idea of what it's going to cost to maintain this on either yearly, basis in our deliberations long term?
Brian and I have talked about that, and Brian, make sure I internalized what you're talking about. They need to be recoded every 15 to 20 years, and that's about a $3 million investment. So part of what we will do as if the community chooses to save this and all that goes with that is between now and then, we would put some maintenance funds in place so that that money accumulates, so that when it gets time to do it, it is not a question of prioritizing that $3 million to something else. This bridge is important to this community. It has this historical significance, and we're going to treat it as a non-negotiable asset. So we've talked about it, and part of what we will bring back to you as a part of that financing is once we fix it, how do we keep it fixed?
Great. I should have known you were already on top of it.
Councilmember Ennis, that's what we talked about as well as part of the rehabilitation design, is we would help provide an operation and maintenance manual as a part of that to outline some of those things as a part of that.
Excellent. Mayor Pro Tem?
And as we explore funding options, the grants that are out there, there'll certainly be an O&M component to us utilizing grant money, especially if it comes with the feds and the strings that are tied to that. And we would ask you, on your expertise and experience, any suggestions you might have where we can go seek available funding. We'll certainly take you up on that.
Yes, we can help with that.
I had a citizen make a comment about inquiring on the name, and I know that it's named right now, but I told them if they started talking to us about a 7-figure or more donation, that I was willing to bring to council the ability to change the name of the bridge if somebody wanted to pick up the tab for that. So
it can be the Dell Computer Bridge at one end and the Bill Gates Foundation at the other. Before Brian leaves, I want to visit about next step once we work out the financing, if we choose to move forward. Why don't you visit with them about the fact that this will be a national bid, and the process that will be required, because not just anybody works on these historical structures.
Sure. Yeah, what we've talked about with staff is that when this does go to plans are complete and you're ready to solicit for a contractor, is this will get national attention. There's just not a lot of these type of structures around. Not a lot of local contractors are going to be able to do this, so you'll have national attention on contractors that do this kind of work. Some of the pictures that I showed you up there, for example, contractor out of Minnesota, so you could very easily get interest from them. So I think it's important to understand that, and when we do want to go out to find a contractor, that we talk about the best way to do that, and not just, we've talked about this before, not just have a low bid contractor, is potentially qualify them, give them a little bit more time during the bidding process than what might be standard, advertised twice and, bid it in a month type of scenario. You might want to give them an extended time period to be able to ask the right questions, work with us to be able to come up with some solutions, value engineering concepts to be able to really get the best economy of scale for this type of bridge. But you will get national attention from some fairly large contractors on this project.
Brian, it's my opinion that that's another reason why it's really important that we come up with a financing strategy and an overall strategy of what we're going to do, because those kind of contractors, when mobilizing and demobilizing, you're literally getting nothing for that money, and it'll drive up the cost.
Right. I think the good thing is that this is a nice project for a contractor to have on a resume, so I think you will get some fairly competitive pricing on it from the few that will be qualified to do it. So I would expect the bids to be fairly
We can
tight
offer
from that
some better
perspective.
weather in the winter than Minnesota as well, so that would be an advantage. Just an excellent job. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry,
And-
Councilmember Rogers.
Oh, thank you very much, Brian. I just had and I know that the city manager said, they're still going to be looking at the funding and how that's a long ways away, and I know that's not a discussion for tonight, but just a thought, because we don't see each other every day. Because this bridge is in every picture that we do, as Bastrop's all there, I don't know if Hot Funds may be part of it, because it's part of our advertising for this town for everything. That maybe, just
Yes,
just
ma'am.
an idea.
We have looked at all of our funds, and $11 million in Bastrop terms of a city of our size, that's real money. There is the ability to fund a portion of it with hotel occupancy tax, but it carries its own debt. The general fund, there's a capacity there, but it then competes with other things like streets and other infrastructure. So it will have to be a combination of a number of things. As I said, we have met with our financial advisor. He is going back and visiting with our bond counsel. We are visiting with Brian and his team. Rebecca Gleason has already been working on some of the historical grants. Something of this magnitude is really going to require a professional fundraiser that gets grants, that has done these kinds of things, and comes in and helps us. And so we will make that a priority, so that when we get into the June, July cycle and we start talking about budgets and funding, we will have at least part of a strategy to bring to you, because time is of essence. That's not lost on us.
Good question, Councilmember Rogers. And we did, the city manager, I guess it was last week, we were talking about, hot funds. We're going to be looking towards hot funds for as much as makes sense. Okay, Councilmember Peterson, we're at the favorite part of your evening.
Please, motion to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn, and by acclamation at 9:06, we are adjourned.